Welcome back to the final talk on this day, on this special day and track of DevOps here at PyConAU 2020, extremely online edition. Thank you for being with us all day today. It has been a fabulous track of amazing talks that has gone way better than we ever thought. The entropy levels have been surprisingly and somewhat disturbingly low. So we can only expect that everything will explode here at the end of the day. And we have an appropriate talk for you on that very theme, which is the worst outage I never caused, which is being presented to us by Julien Goodwin. Now, Julien is a senior site reliability engineer at Google in Sydney. From 2011 to 2018, he worked on Google's production networks focused on internet routing and interconnection. When not at work, he does things like designing custom embedded Linux machines and modernizing frequency distribution systems. He's also the current secretary of Linux Australia, which is the parent organization for PyConAU, and they are great supporters of the conference, for which we thank them a great deal. I'm personally really looking forward to this particular talk. I really want to hear all about when things can go horribly, horribly wrong. Hopefully everything will run smoothly for the talk out to the end of the day. So please tell us all about your experience, Julien.
Thank you. So just first up, this is an incident that happened back in 2017. Things have changed since, mostly for the better, pretty much all for the better. It's to get you thinking about what happens when you have near misses more so than the actual incident itself. So your cast of characters, at the time I was a network SRE in Sydney. This was during daylight savings time, and my counterpart was Chris over in Virginia in the US. Major thing of note, we are the people with the deepest knowledge, or were at the time, of these systems involved. We were the experts. We also aren't in California, and in fact, neither of our teams are in California. Networking, very much at the time, slightly less so now, quite a distributed organization across half a dozen sites in different countries. And you can see the time zones. We both overlapped quite a lot because neither of us sleep very much, but normal work hours do not agree. So what happened? Well, near miss. Got lucky. One Monday morning, and unusually for me, I was in the office at 10 a.m., which is stupidly early for me. Chris sends me a poke going, hey, it's Monday morning your time and still Sunday night for me. Would you mind rolling this change we discussed out? And I was like, yeah, all right. And just kick off the tool. And the tooling takes a couple minutes. So while it was doing it, I just went to go verify the change and, oh, look, the network's running Rev 5. We're pushing Rev 8. Let's do a diff. And diff the files and get a big number of changed lines, which is strange, but one of the other changes might have been significant. So let's look at the other changes. Oh, first change, it's small, completely reasonable. Second change, small, completely reasonable. And now our change is really big, but it should be small. So I look again at what we're changing. And there's the change we're making, but in the code review, we discussed some aspects of it and gone, oh, hey, there's a magic number that we set on everything, but it doesn't do anything now, so we should get rid of it. And I'd assumed that it was something we'd do later, but okay, it got done. It got added to the change and committed. And just being extra paranoid, I just checked what that magic number is. Because I know we discussed it in the change, but we hadn't actually, we actually define it as the number, not the name. So I did the check myself and discovered that, oh, we had translated the name incorrectly, and actually that's very, very important, and it would have been very bad if we'd pushed it. So luckily, just in another terminal, the push tool from earlier is waiting, sitting there, and Control C. Okay, let's do that. Roll back the CL so nobody's going to accidentally push this. Now, what would have happened? Well, basically Google would have fallen off the internet. There's bits that wouldn't have, but enough would have broken that for practical purposes, Google fell off the internet is a fair thing to say. We also know that there's other networks that use reachability to Google as their proxy for the internet is working, and they would have fallen off the internet, which is a little bit unpleasant. And as a side effect of the way BGP works, this isn't inherent, but it's combined with the design of that backbone, which is a fairly standard system. This would have taken effect for everything essentially instantly. Within 2 or 3 seconds, we would have gone from everything works to everything is broken, which not exactly fun. Okay, so how did we get there? Well, a little bit of background for those of you that aren't network engineers. You've probably heard of a route on the internet, which is a route is an aggregate of IP addresses. And you can get them into the internet's routing system pretty easily in a couple of different ways. They might be directly advertised by a router on a LAN. If you've got a network with 10.0.0.0, you just have that router go, hey, I know 10.0.0. That works. You might have a dynamic advertisement, say your load balancer, your web server pool, advertise that, hi, my web server pool is healthy, so here is the IP address of my pool. You can aggregate the above when you say have your web server pool. The load balancer might only advertise the one IP address, but you need to advertise the broader route. And then there's static routes. And you may well have static routes advertised for reasons that they just don't have a localization. For example, we have Google Public DNS 8.8.8. We don't have one place that advertises that because it doesn't make sense. So we define it as a static route and we advertise these out of the system. And this is roughly what the configuration looks like. It's Junos style config. And it's a BGP route with a bunch of magic numbers. And that's not the most reviewable thing for humans. We have lots of magic numbers there. Some of them roughly mean this. And where we actually got into trouble is you can combine them, and the way the definitions work in the routing logic is a little bit weird. You can do matches on multiple as a named entity. And in fact, that's what we had. We had the magic behavior match as a named entity. And unfortunately, we had some tooling which when you went, oh, tell me what this magic number is, it would display that it was magic behavior. And the ultimate bug in that tool was simply that the last definition with that number was used. And that was obviously a silly bug, easy to fix. And in fact, we fixed it in a couple of ways. But it's sort of irrelevant to the actual change. What we were doing is just breaking up a big IPv4 address block into some smaller blocks. The sort of thing that, as networking people, we do all the time. We get a big block of IP addresses. We end up breaking it down, assigning it out to usage. So Chris sends me a proposed change to do this, and we end up discussing it because it is just wrote generic things, but it happened to tweak some of the experimental parts I'd been working with. So this is a sort of a Thursday morning my time. We're going, well, this part over here, we're not advertising that to the world, so let's just not set those values. And some discussion goes on, and then on Saturday morning my time, Friday night Chris's time, he sends an update going, hey, we've also got this extra stuff including do this magic behavior. Should that go? To which my response is along the lines of, oh yeah, we don't need that. It no longer does anything. We should just get rid of it. And Chris does and submits the change. And I didn't look at the change after that until Monday morning to discuss. So that's sort of how we got there. What are our root causes? And, well, we had obsolete config. We simply shouldn't have had a definition for magic that hadn't worked for years. We'd gotten rid of the policy logic. We hadn't got rid of the definitions. Some systems have the concept of you define your constants like that with a tag saying deprecated or other hints that they're obsolete. This system did not have that. We had magic numbers that humans needed to deal with. There's nothing wrong with magic numbers, but if you're making humans deal with them, they really should translate to something a human can deal with. There was no tests. We had some syntax validation, but we didn't actually validate the content. We didn't have simulation. We had a simulation framework. It was a bit too complex, and actually hooking up automation injection into simulation of some of these low-level network elements was not a practical thing. We had related testing, but in general, BGP testing where you've got multiple devices or virtual devices is not something that I've seen great options for. There's a bunch of them where you've got individual elements, but not, I want these 3 routers with these set of policies hooked together, is not a trivial problem. It had no clear ownership. We had half a dozen teams that touched it. We had about 3 that pretty regularly touched it. No team would say they owned it. And it's more because if they said they owned it, some people on other teams would object, except they would refuse to own it either. So everyone would change it. Nobody quite did the efforts and maintenance. So I did some, Chris did some, but in general, maintenance was done minimally. This also meant that people went to make changes in a minimal possible way for their change, as opposed to making the cleanest possible change for the resulting network. Gives us a bit of a haunted graveyard. This was not great, and it meant that nobody understood it, and we couldn't get rid of things. There's other aspects that, who knows, I might talk about one day. So, okay, let's reset back. I had this incident. It didn't actually cause an incident. So, I mean, nobody notices a near miss. Maybe I just ignore it and move on with my life. It's just easier. I mean, I guess I might have to do some work or something if that would be noticed. And, well, yeah, so I was still twitching 3 days later, and I am someone that does large-scale incidents. This is not the sort of thing I do. And it affected me. So I had to do something. I couldn't just ignore it. Now, when I was writing this up, I actually got a question from someone that was a colleague at the time and is still in that networking world, asking, would actually having had the outage be better? Would we trade a press-worthy outage? And this would have been a major press-worthy outage. But it might have gotten us the effort to fix things. And in this case, it would have been such a major outage that I don't think that's a fair comparison. Also, at the time, there were some organizational things, and I'm not sure we would have gotten engagement. But that's a consideration I shouldn't have had to make. If you treat your near misses like a real outage, you get all the benefits of learning without the cost of the outage. So I did write a postmortem. I was still twitching. It helped me accept what we had nearly done, what I had contributed to. But it was a near miss. I couldn't get engagement. Nobody cared. Now, had we had an actual outage, I would have had meetings with VPs and directors having to explain myself. It wouldn't have been penalized. We're very good about that. But there still would have been a lot of interaction and engagement. Without it, not so much. But it was a good opportunity to document the state of network elements. This is something I was big on at the time, was when we had outages involving these haunted graveyard elements, it's a wonderful time to explain how they work in your postmortems background section. And to this day, we still have a teachable postmortems list that includes a lot of these postmortems I wrote, explaining how various elements of the network actually work, because we'd sort of forgotten them until they broke. And then we got to learn how they worked again in anger. and document. And okay, postmortem that nobody reads, whatever. Let's write some tests. Now this is where the Python comes in. So we had parser libraries, and conveniently I can just hook this file up because it's sitting in our source code control system, and that's got all the hooks for testing. So I just wrote some tests and parsed the file. The file is very cookie cutter. In fact, it explicitly should be cookie cutter. Everything should be standard. If it's not, that's bad. So let's just make sure it's exactly what we expect. Make sure there's routes of certain type. If we have 0 routes advertised to the internet, either someone has re-architected things and the test is wrong, or they're going to break the internet. We should have uniqueness. Indeed, we discovered bugs with this. We discovered we'd had the same route defined twice in the file. It didn't matter, but it still meant that the humans would be confused. We set those magic numbers, only the ones we expect. There's some topological RFC 1918. Once you start writing tests and get the key ones in, for a lot of this sort of config elements, you can think of some ideas that you should test. And they're quite easy, and it turns out every time I've done this, we've found latent errors, usually trivial, sometimes they matter, and we've always had at least one incident prevented pretty quickly. At the very least, we've saved someone making a change, going to canary that change and discovering it doesn't work. That alone has almost always paid for those tests very quickly. Now, a couple months later, this should not have been needed, this second part, because we had this broader config generation system that was at the time an upcoming thing. It was still used for some stuff, but we hadn't rolled it out for everything, and this was a bit of config we hadn't. And at the time of the incident, it was, oh yeah, within about 6 months we'll get to this. Incident was in April. In November, when the US is off on Thanksgiving, things are a little bit quiet, and they hadn't started work on this generator. So instead of writing it in their complex system, I just wrote a simple one in Python, taking text protocol buffer. This is Google. We love our protocol buffers. And generate the config file as output. And then a simple test that just says generated output is identical to the file, which very easy way to make this sort of manual generator that's an interim thing work and be reliable and trustable. And you can see that saying AS15169 external in text is a lot more readable and trustable than magic numbers. Saying this route is global is a lot more trustable than 27 localized locations. Oh, wait, it should actually be 30. We added some and forgot to add them. And this was something I knocked out in 2 days, massively improving the state of players' result. And it is eventually being replaced. But it certainly paid for itself simply because every change review is so much easier. And of course, the better your libraries and tooling, the better a toolkit you've got to make simple, more simple tools for yourself. The easier these are to write, the better your system gets. And of course, shared libraries, you can introspect and understand them. That's actually where this stops. So this is a story of an incident that never happened. There's not the big, oh, look at the media when we screwed everything up. It's a story of a learning opportunity we weren't able to fully use because we were learning from incidents when we had incidents. We were much worse at learning from them when they weren't incidents. And you get a wonderful opportunity with a near miss. When you write a postmortem, think about your incident without the where we got lucky. Had I not checked that diff, had I just hit push, we would have had an outage. had I not triple checked the actual definition file, we would have had an outage. But you can learn, you can fix things, and that's what I want to share. Hopefully, without needing to break everything. Thank you very much.
That was fantastic, and very close to my heart. This is something that I have personally lived through. So this is very, very close to me, and I love this talk. A couple of questions. I have one, in fact, that I would like to ask, which is around that you chose to do this. That it was something that you said, look, we had a near miss. Things weren't actually on fire. It didn't burn down. I've been in that sort of situation before. Does that require just a kind of internal cultural discipline to do that postmortem, even though you didn't have this massive press release inducing event? Or is there a way that you think that you can encourage organizations? Because people don't really like to talk about their failure, and that's one of the reasons that we actually ran this track.
There's an element of autonomy. So the history of that part of Google networking would be a whole explanation as to why, but the operations part of networking didn't have a huge amount of autonomy and gained it very slowly over time. This was towards the end of that where the operations group really was quite autonomous, and the nature of the work I did in that group was itself anomalously autonomous for that group. I found these haunted graveyards, I fixed them, I learned them. So this was on brand for me, but this was still the first postmortem I wrote, first postmortem for an incident I managed. I'd worked on a lot of major incidents, but they'd never been incidents that I had caused or triggered. And I guess that was part of the different feeling from it. But it's helpful to see that people don't get punished. There have been outages I have seen at Google caused by someone doing something silly they shouldn't have done, either because they didn't know not to do it or for whatever reason that is completely justifiable. And having seen that those people, we celebrate them for the learning opportunity, meant I wasn't worried about getting fired even if I had caused the outage. I'm more disappointed that we failed the learning opportunity than missed an outage.
And that's something that we were trying to encourage with talks with this track, is that encouraging people to feel safe to share the failure so that we can learn from it, that it could become that learning experience. So this is a great example of one of those. So thank you for that. Another question that we have from the chat is that, did you eventually get engagement on the value of the work that you've done as a result of the near miss, if not from your management structure, but from your peers?
I did get some. I mean, as I say, it was sort of on brand. So this was the stuff I was always doing. I'd had similar where the simplifications unblocked things. We were doing these sort of config generation systems. Simply looking at the proposals for these config generation systems going, there's a whole heap of complexity for 3 peering connections out of 30,000. Do those 3 matter? How about we delete them? And then we don't need to do all this extra work. And there were many of those. I mean, for the networking people at Google, not that there's anyone here, there's a whole list of them. But you become able to look back at work over a couple of years and go, here are things I enabled. It wasn't visible they were blocking at the time, but we have made things easier. We have made our systems easier. When we shut down networking in Sydney, I was able to finish off a couple of projects, and that meant I didn't have to teach the incoming team about a bunch of things because they were gone. So that made everyone's life easier.
Yeah, I think that's something that we miss a little bit with these ideas of, like, we're avoiding a failure mode, and that's the only reason that we would do this. Is that there's actually all of these other benefits that are worth it, like well worth it, even if it didn't actually avoid any failures at all. It just has so many of these other really good things to it. We got another got a couple of questions. They're kind of two parts of the same thing. It's like around getting this, getting engagement from other people. Essentially, it sounds like getting buy-in, I think, is what's meant here, without too much of your own personal investment, and then balancing how much of your own personal investment you put in. Is it kind of a pick your battles question?
It really is. As I say, I was a slightly odd organizational position where this was in my area to touch. And when we had situations where someone else caused an outage, somewhat similar, again, but this was config I owned, I would end up taking it on and working for them. And that was a lot easier for me to stomach, because it's their mess up that had I infinite time, I would have restructured things so it wouldn't have happened. But often it wasn't something I'd thought of. But getting help to where you need, hey devs, can you add this feature to make the system a little bit safer? It's beyond my skill abilities or complexity or touches too deep, whatever. Some organizations have really great behaviors and that works wonderfully. Some organizations do not. In my time in Google networking, quite often popping over to see the people in person was really valuable. A lot of the more networking-y people were used to randomly chat, email, contact, and consider things. But more the development people, we worked a lot better in person. And I have had cases where 4 months of arguing is solved in 5 minutes by flying halfway around the world. And it's silly, but 4 months of our time is so much more expensive than flying me halfway across the planet that I always feel silly at the end of it and go, well, why didn't we do that?
It's funny how often we're so deeply embedded in all these computer systems. I'm getting old now, so I'm learning things from a different perspective. The humans are the important part of everything. So often, so very, very often. And I think as a field, we are getting a lot better at understanding the human side of all of these systems we build, and how important the human bits are in making everything else work. It turns out the computer parts are actually kind of easy, relatively speaking.
Yeah, as fun and simple as the machines are, it's talking to humans, convincing the humans. It's something you see as a junior engineer as I want to do this to play with the computers. Yes, but being a senior engineer means I'm actually programming the humans with documents.
So much. I love that phrase. I'm totally stealing that. That's great. I think we're running up. We're actually a little bit over time, so I'm going to have to wrap it there for questions. Now, Julien, I think you are going to hang around for a little bit and be available in the chat for questions. Is that right?
I will be in the hallway chat or the social VC.
Very cool. So do stick around. That's our last talk for the day. So do come and have a chat with Julien in the hallway chat or in the community VC that is around there for the end of the day. Thank you, Julien, for a great talk and a fabulous way to end the DevOps track here today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.